Good afternoon from Armenia media. As Azerbaijan attacked Artsakh in September 2020, news soon emerged about the involvement of hired Syrian mercenaries to fight Armenian troops on the ground. Breaking this story was independent journalist Lindsey Snell. Lindsey has since closely followed the ongoing Azeri aggression against Armenia and Artsakh, including the most recent blockade. She joins us today from Berlin to talk about her insights. Thank you, Lindsey, for joining us, and good morning to you in Berlin.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the Artsakh blockade, which has been going on for more than 70 days now. You have closely studied the eco-activists who are implementing the blockade on the ground. Of course, it is absurd to think of the existence of any sort of activists in a dictatorship like Azerbaijan. So who really are these people, and what can you tell us about the logistics of how they are organizing and maintaining this blockade?
Well, the logistics have shifted over time. So in the beginning, in mid-December when this started, actually the first people who came and played the role of eco-activist at the Laçın corridor were the Turkish contractors who were already there, working on the hotels and sort of rebuilding infrastructure and occupied Shushi. They went, and so did soldiers posing as civilians who were also already in the area. So they were just bodies who were there. And then after that, there became sort of a process of busing in college students, university students, mostly from Baku, who come for 1 to 3 days and stay in a hotel and stay in the Laçın corridor for 3 days, and they get class credits. A friend who used to work in administration at a university in Baku said sometimes if they fail a class, they can do this to pass the class, things like that. So it's just been a steady stream of volunteers who are all from universities. One of them even posted, I think I put it on my Instagram, a list sort of detailing the people from a certain class and a certain major at a university who were going to be on site and their hours and their dates. So, I mean, it's all very coordinated. This is not a spontaneous protest. These are not protesters. These are people who are doing things for the Azerbaijani government for benefit.
Yeah. So you've already kind of indicated about an active Turkish involvement in this blockade. Is there more that you can share in this respect?
I think it's clear because Turkish authorities came out and supported the blockade and supported what Azerbaijan was doing. And so it was very obvious that, I mean, everything that Azerbaijan does, Turkey has a role, as we saw in the war in 2020. Obviously, Turkey's role was massive, not only in terms of, sending its own Turkish soldiers there as like advisors, but also the Syrian mercenaries that were sent. So Turkey always has a role in the bigger moves that Azerbaijan makes. In this case, though, it's interesting because when the Turkish contractors that I mentioned went, the ones who are sort of, excuse me, the ones who are sort of working on hotels and things in Shushi, went to the protest, they had Turkish flags. And immediately Azerbaijani soldiers came to them and told them, you can't have these here. These are forbidden. They took the flags away. They said no more Turkish flags. And then at some point, one of the contractors at a hotel in Shushi told me that they were just forbidden to go at all. So it's very clear that Turkey has a role in the blockade, but wants that to be completely hidden from the international community.
Yeah. So how is the blockade then being portrayed in media in Azerbaijan and Turkey? I know you closely follow that as well.
The blockade is being covered in Turkey and Azerbaijani state-run media completely as a protest. Every day they post videos and photos and interviews from the Laçın corridor, and the line is basically like, despite the cold weather, we're here and we're standing firm in our position. Meanwhile, they're there for a few hours and then they go off to a very nice hotel nearby. And they've got a stocked grocery store in Shushi that they're using. They have hot food 3 times a day. So, I mean, it's a pretty cushy gig.
And do they deny that there is actually a blockade that is happening? So you know how they use, every time there's a Red Cross or ICRC convoy that passes through, they use a see there's no blockade. Are they also doing that in the media? Is that the official line?
That is absolutely the official line. And every time there's a convoy of ICRC or Russian peacekeepers, you see 10 cameras trailing them because this is always big news. There's clearly no blockade because ICRC and the Russian peacekeepers are going through. Doesn't matter that no civilian, Armenian vehicles are allowed to pass, but this is what they always cite as proof. And it's really absurd because you look at other blockades like Gaza, and ICRC is sort of like how people from Gaza would be transported, to get medical care or whatever. And it's the same thing here. People in Artsakh who need medical care to go to Armenia has to be through ICRC. It's just like the textbook definition of a blockade, but this is what they cite when they say that there is no blockade. And not only that, they had a sort of a trip of tourists, 30 international tourists, mostly from Western countries, Europe, America, and they brought them to the Latin corridor to get them to say basically like, they're eco-activists. But one Brazilian tourist actually went and said, it's obvious that no one here cares about the environment. This is just about power.
Right. Do you think, looking at international media coverage, how would you assess it regarding this Artsakh blockade, but also more broadly, the Artsakh war and the ongoing aggression by Azerbaijan against Armenia and Artsakh? Do you think international media are sort of buying this line that there is no blockade? In fact, do you think anyone still buys that line?
I think that international media has been pretty clear about the fact that it's not a real blockade. I think that the coverage since the war has been sort of this both sidism and false equivalencies. And you don't see this in coverage when it comes to the Ukraine war and Russia. For example, no one is saying, but you need to be really fair to Russia. But when it comes to Azerbaijan, there's sort of it seems to be like an editorial mandate for a lot of major outlets that you need to be more neutral and language towards Azerbaijan, even if Azerbaijan is the aggressor. So, I think, but it's been clear from the coverage, which has been too little and too late, frankly, that no one buys it's a blockade. But this also seems to have been a vehicle for Western media to also blame Russia. And I think that that's a lot of the interest, unfortunately, in the coverage of the blockade.
Yeah. So, you just brought up the Ukraine comparison, which is very true. When it comes to the Armenia-Azerbaijan, Artsakh-Azerbaijan issue, what drives Western media considerations?
Like I said, I think that mostly at this point, it's a vehicle to blame Russia, or because Russia's busy in Ukraine now. Look, they're throwing the Armenians to the dogs. Doesn't matter that the West hasn't really been there either. I think that's there are blips, and there are occasionally very thorough, very good pieces that cover the crisis and sort of the history of animosity and ethnic hatred instilled in the Azerbaijani people by the Azerbaijani government. But I think that more often than not now, it's a way to sort of leverage Russia's involvement and blame Russia.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that back in 2020, you were the one to break the news of the involvement of Syrian mercenaries in the Artsakh war. Can you tell us how you came to uncover that story?
I've spent many years covering Syria and embedding in Syria. And from 2013 to 2016, I was embedding with the Syrian opposition, formerly the Free Syrian Army, now the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army. And in 2019, they were sent to Libya en masse, and actually they're still in Libya. And it became clear that they were going to be mercenaries, and they were mercenaries in Libya. And actually, for a couple of months before September 2020, rumors were sort of swirling around the different factions of the Syrian National Army that the next deployment would be Azerbaijan for a war in Karabakh. And honestly, even the commanders that I'm in touch with, no one was sure until they were on a plane. The mandate came like days before, and this was like 3 or 4 days before the war started, basically. Mm. And I got a picture of, a military plane full of Syrians, giving thumbs up, wearing COVID masks. And then it was clear that they were going. And it's something that Turkey and Azerbaijan still deny, despite the greater international community, the UN, Russia, the US, all being very sure that Syrian mercenaries were there.
Yeah. Increasingly, we are seeing independent journalists step in to fill gaps in mainstream media coverage, whether that's to uncover stories that are being forgotten, like you have done, or challenging, presenting perspectives that challenge the dominant narrative. You're an independent journalist that focuses on Turkey, even though in the past you've also worked with mainstream channels such as MSNBC and the American ABC News. I have to say that because we have an ABC News in Australia as well. Why did you decide to become an independent journalist, and what drives your focus on Turkey?
I had a situation where I was kidnapped in Syria and then subsequently imprisoned in Turkey relating to the 2016 coup attempt, which really kind of gave me a very clear vision of what Turkey's doing, not only by meeting people in prison who were oppressed by Turkey, but I mean, it just sort of changed my perspective on the things that Turkey was doing. And I think gave me insight that maybe Western journalists, traditionally covering Turkey don't have. So that's definitely a big part of the drive. Also, I mean, Turkey's foreign policy since 2016 has completely changed and become more and more aggressive. And you see multiple invasions and occupations, and of course, the use of the Syrian mercenaries, which, the Syrian opposition has been a topic I've covered for so long that that's something that's really important to me. And I think in terms of being independent is very important in journalism now, because coverage has become bifurcated, and it's really you're on this side or you're on this side, and there's just no market. I mean, there's no way to make a living if you're towing the middle line and sort of showing that there are bad things about both sides, which is the truth. I mean, and I think that, Ukraine, Russia is a good example of this. You cannot cover Ukraine, Russia with any unbiased, unfiltered view, because it's not marketable to either side. And right. It's a really bad time for mainstream journalism, but a great time for independent journalism, because I think that the public has become aware that it's propaganda on both sides, and it's needed for people to come in and be independent and sort of show the truth and the gray area.
Yeah. You just made reference to Turkey's invasions and actions since 2016. For us Armenians, we're familiar with all that going way back, not just from 2016. But there is a narrative that is still dominant in Western mainstream media that Turkey is an important ally and partner for the West, and this opinion is also upheld, unfortunately, by Western governments and public opinion. What will it take to break this myth?
I think that the myth is something that Western governments, Western officials don't actually believe. I think that every Western government is very aware of Turkey's true motivations and Turkey's true involvement in some very bad things. I mean, I would cite ISIS as an example. Turkey opened its borders. Turkey let tens of thousands of jihadi terrorists come from all over the world into its airports and freely cross its borders and cross back and forth for whatever it needed. Turkey has still failed to prosecute many of the ISIS terrorists who are in Turkey and known to be living in Turkey. Every major operation to execute an ISIS leader in Syria in the past few years has been in the Turkish occupied territories in Syria. So that's no secret to the Western governments. I think that it's more that Turkey's strategic importance to the West means that the West will overlook these things. And the West will overlook sending, mercenaries en masse to Libya to gain a stronger foothold there. We'll overlook the provocations against Greece. We'll overlook sending Syrian mercenaries to Artsakh during the war, for example. I think, the many incursions in northeast Syria also. I think that the West just prioritizes Turkey's importance strategically over all of the bad things that Turkey does.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe that your work as an independent journalist is helping make, a dent in international news coverage?
I don't want to sound like a nihilist, but I think that certain things that I cover, definitely when something is a story that's broken, like the Syrian mercenaries, for example, though I will say that undoubtedly that would have become news at some point. That wouldn't have stayed hidden, I don't think. I think it's notable because it happened before the war, and the war still happened, and the international community was still largely silent about it. But I guess it makes a small dent, but I think that the dominant narrative is still controlled by the major media outlets.
Yeah. Just let's go back a little bit on the situation in Artsakh. Do you see any indication that this might end sometime soon, or what do you believe is the end game here?
I'm not sure what the end game is, but I don't think it's going to end soon, unfortunately. And despite the UN Security Council and virtually every Western and many non-Western governments calling on Azerbaijan to lift the blockade and clear the Lachen corridor, Azerbaijan has been very clear that it has no intention of doing that. Aliyev said that the action will continue until their demands are met, and their demands, of course, are basically to clear out Artsakh. And I think that it's very clear that the international community is not going to do anything to force Azerbaijan's hand. The EU has said there will be no sanctions against Azerbaijan. Aliyev was just in Munich for the security conference. So Azerbaijan is suffering no ill effects as a result of its actions, its blockade. So it's hard to say what the end game is, but Azerbaijan definitely has no intention of stopping. Yeah.
Just want to remind our viewers that you were also recently in Armenia speaking with people who are impacted by the situation on the ground, and you just released a documentary that our viewers can watch on your social media platforms, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. Lindsey, thank you very much for joining us today and for making the time. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
Սիդնեի հայ քաղաքին քաչ ցանոթ EM Funerals տաղման սպասարկությունը ձեր դրամատրության դագ է ամեն օր եւ ամեն ժամ ձեր ամենադժվար ու ամենավշտալի բահերուն աչակցության մխիթարանքի եւ սփոփանքի իր մասնակի դացած ծառայությունը ապահովելով ցեզի եւ ձեր սիրելիներուն EM Funerals տաղման սպասարկության սեփականադեր Դիգին Էլո Մգրդիչյանը գխոստանա ձեր հարազատին մատուցել հրաժեշտի վերջին ու հարկանքի կերազանց թաղմանական սպասարկություն։ Ձեր հարցումներուն եւ առաջարկներուն համար գրնակ հեռացայնել 0405 675 571 եւ կամ 1300 076 100 համարին։ EM Funerals տաղման սպասարկության գրասենյակի հասցեն է Suite 7 Level 1 174 Willoughby Road, Nuremberg։ EM Funerals տաղման սպասարկությունը հբարդորեն գերաշխավոր է Armenia Media ընկերակցության առցանց հաղորդումները։ Ձեր բնակարանի կետնահատակը եւ կամ լոքարանի ու լվացարանի բادرը ավելի եւս կեղեցկացնելու եւ դարվան բոլոր եղանակներուն համապատասխանող ճաշակով հարթարելու համար անվարան դիմեցեք Carpet Court քորքավաճառքի հանրազանոթ ընկերության Սիդնեի, Ռայթ, Քրոսնես, Չաթսվուդ եւ Վիլլուուդ արվարձաններու մեջ գտնվող իրենց քեղեցիկ ցուցասրահներով Carpet Court-ի աշխատագիցները ցեզի համար կապահովեն զանազան բարձրորակ եւ գունավոր սալիկներ, քորքեր եւ դաղթագամաձեր։ Մեր խորին շնորհակալությունը կհայտնենք Armenia Media ընկերակցության գլխավոր երաշխավոր Carpet Court-ի սեփականադերեր Դեր եւ Դիգին Գարբիս եւ Հայգուհի Սարյաններուն։